getting really good at this point. And so if you want to kind of bring us into about the storm and what's happening here.
Yeah, this is really the meat of the book. And I say that to say the rest, chapter 1, all the way building up to chapter 5, when we're in chapter 6 here, was basically the perspective shift. Now we're jumping into, if you have the perspective shift and understanding it and shifting your mind to understand what we were talking about in the other chapters, which is that builder of all things is the owner. We operate as stewards. And when you capture that stewardship, you start opening the door of your, almost like your belief system transfers from yourself to a higher power, right, into God himself. And that allows your heart, the soil of your heart, to be more acceptable to what God's trying to do. It's kind of like becomes, your soil's ready for the seed and fruit for God to work in your life. And so we wanted to really establish, when I say we, just, people I've talked to, experiences I've had, me and my wife, when I was writing the book, I wanted to really establish, that first. But in preparation for this part is which I call battling adversity, is really the meat of the book, because people, businesses, pastors, parents, that's a lot of P's. We battle adversity every day. You can't ignore them. And what I've experienced, I've done it, I see people do it. We want to categorize our adversity and call it a storm naturally. Hey man, I'm going through a storm.
Sure, yeah.
And I've heard that a lot. And so, but listening, especially in business, was able to really pinpoint this. And then also now paying attention to life, is that depending on what kind of adversity you're in is based on how you'll respond to it.
That's
so
right.
you can't respond to each adversity the same. And so I wanted to take and really look at a storm, through my experiences I shared in the book, just growing up in the Midwest, and the type of storms we would get. Man, we got those Wizard of Oz storms, those like we get tornadoes. I remember when I left to come here to the islands, that, there's this town called Washington right outside, 10 minutes from my city, got wiped out with one of the greatest tornadoes in the Midwest in a very long time, very historic. Some of my friends' homes, it was all over the national news, and the storms there are just crazy, and so, but looking at a storm, man, and I referenced that to like the adversities I go through in business, through life, through marriage, through friendships. There's all these different challenges. Like storms, they come a lot of times when you don't expect them, and they're typically out of your control. They're not something that's caused by your decisions, by people. You don't have, people are saying that the government's creating these storms.
Sure.
But in reality, God is allowing them. It's how the earth operates. They're going to come, they're going to go. You got to be just naturally ready and prepared. And however it hits, one of my favorite movies is Twister. The old Twister. The new one is pretty good too, but just, they come in all different forms, and your job is to survive it. That's all there is to it. But the battles and adversities we face in life, I don't think it's wise to categorize it always as a storm. So in where we're going in this book, the next 3 chapters are vital on categorizing and discerning what adversity are we in. And so I broke those out in 3 categories, 3 pillars, which I call the storm, the snake, and the smoke. And so this chapter specifically is those adversities that are out of your control, like a storm. So to set this, podcast up, to set the chapter up in this next 3 chapters, was being able to discern and categorize it first. So what?
That's good.
So you know how to respond to it correctly, right? How to respond to it practically, how to respond to it spiritually. Even spiritually, there's a different way to respond to however the adversity is, right? And so just to set the stage for this chapter, that's what this meat we're getting into is like, okay, any adversity you're facing in life or business, this applies. You know, to look at it and say, okay, which category is it? Which one is it? Are we talking about something that's out of my control? Or are you the snake, which I reference as the deceiver, the liar? I mean, we hear the word snake, and that's why I use it, is because we think of, like, you know, the enemy, the devil, you know, the snake in the Bible. And so when you meet somebody who's kind of like a deceiving type, oh, he's snake-ish, you know, he's kind of snake-ish. So
normally it's a people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Normally it is a person
Yeah.
who, when, you know, you discern, we'll talk about that in the next podcast, but, you know, when somebody's after attacking your character or coming at you, you know, in a snakish way, we'll call it right now. And then the last one is the smoke, is when it's self-inflicted adversity, when you really could look in the mirror and say, did I start this fire? You know, kind of deal. So, and the smoke, we'll talk about that. But very important, and even in the book, I have this kind of like interlude that describes everything I just shared, so to set the tone for the next 3 chapters. So when you're going into the storm, I want you to embrace categorizing it like of its own adversity, so you understand how to respond it, because you cannot respond, or I would advise you to respond to the snake like you would a storm. I wouldn't advise for you to respond to the smoke like you would a storm in these adversities. So that's just to set the stage of the interlude, you know, and interlude this podcast before we start talking about the storm of where we're headed. This is the challenges of life. These are the tornadoes. These are the big rainstorms that are trying to take you out, trying to make it so, you know, the things that are out of your control.
You would say that the storm is normally something that's out of your control, out of your hands, something you can't really, you know, control. I mean, you have no control over this thing.
Yeah, good example. I'm in residential construction. I own a residential construction company. We rely heavily on putting together architectural plans, submitting them to the city and county, and getting permit approvals. Permit approval, usually 3 to 6 months. But when that delay kicks out to like 2 years, and that's, to me, a storm being created. There's different levels of the storms that we'll talk about, but that's, to me, that's out of my control. There's certain things I could try to help control that, but there's just a point where you're like, man, there's nothing I can do to change the situation. And what's unique about the storm is it's God allowed. God allows storms. That's the foundational part of the approach to a storm, is understanding that if God allowed it, that's a great foundation to start. Like, it's in his control. And that's the hard part as a human. We want to control everything. But when it's out of your control, whose control is it in?